Say when. Hey guys, welcome back to Unleashed. I'm your host, Brent Henderson, and it is so good to have you here. And remember, we are the Resistance. You know, one of the things that I have noticed over the years is that men will spend an incredible amount of money chasing adventure. You know, we will buy the best rain gear money can buy. We'll spend thousands on rods and reels, right? Bows and arrows, AR platforms, spotting scopes. We will save every vacation day we can. We will travel halfway across the country. We will fly halfway around the world if that's what it takes. And when it's all over, we'll come home with a picture or a trophy hanging on the wall, and we will spend the next several years just dreaming about doing it again. Why? I have come to believe it's because adventure and awe wake up the heart of a man. And let me say something. It is essential to manhood. Not all men's adventure looks the same, but make no mistake about it. Men need it. We crave it. It's kind of a validation that we are men. A reflection of the one who made up all of these amazing things and places that we go to that wakes us up and makes us feel fully alive. There are things that check the box when it comes to giving our hearts a wake-up call. A few years ago, I was kayaking in Alaska in a place called Kayakers Cove. I had a humpback whale pass directly underneath my kayak, and I'm talking maybe 20 feet below me. But when you've got something that's the size of a school bus going underneath you, it wakes up your heart. So it definitely checked the box. You know, another time I had an entire pod of killer whales surface beside me. Check the box. I have hunted in brown bear country. Check. I've spent nights in remote cabins listening to things move around outside my tent. Check. I've been stranded for days on both land and sea waiting for that distant, motor or propeller, on its way back to pull us out of an iffy situation. Check the box. And one of the biggest adventures of my life happened near the Aialik Peninsula in the Kenai Fjords National Park when an overnight fishing trip suddenly turned into a 6-day survival story where catching fish actually became a part of the survival plan, not just a 2-day excursion. Before I tell you about that, I want to take a moment and I want to thank my new Unleashed podcast sponsor, ATSCO. They make a huge line of outdoor products for sportsmen. And you know that if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you hear me spending a lot of time in the outdoors. Whether I'm chasing bass here at home, trout in northwestern Pennsylvania, fishing in Florida for barracuda, maybe heading to Alaska for salmon or halibut. One thing always seems to follow me home after a day on the water, and that's fish smell. And we all know that fish slime, bait, everything else that comes with a successful day of fishing, it has a way of getting into your hands, your clothes, your boat, your cooler, and just about everything else. And that smell can stick with you for a long time. That's why I've been using something by ATSCO called Zero Fish Stink. It's a part of their Zero Odor line products. And what I like about it, it doesn't just try to cover up the odors with another scent. It actually helps eliminate fish and organic odors at the source. So whether you're cleaning fish at the dock, washing down the boat, trying to keep your gear from smelling like yesterday's catch, it's absolutely worth checking out. You can find it at atsco.com. That's ATSKO.com. All right, let's get back into today's episode. So, speaking of Alaska, most of you know the broad strokes of the story I'm about to talk about, where we were stranded off the coast of Alaska, like 35 miles out. You've heard about Holgate Glacier almost falling on our heads when we got too close. You've heard about crossing the Aialik Bay in a little 15-foot Zodiac in a storm on the open ocean. Maybe you remember hearing about the anchor coming loose and almost smashing us against the cliffs. How it took 6 days for us to be rescued after our motor puked out in the open ocean. But what I've really never talked about is what was happening inside of us while all of this was going on. I think, honestly, that's where the real story is. The Aialik Peninsula is one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen. There are massive glaciers, whales, sea otters, puffins, black bears, Dall's porpoises, harbor seals. There's towering mountains rising straight out of the Gulf of Alaska. It looks like paradise, at least paradise for me. But the beauty and danger often occupy the same landscape. And one day, our adventure went sideways. We found ourselves stranded with no easy way home. Every night I would crawl into the hull of that 29-foot fiberglass bayliner and I'd try to get some sleep. Usually out here you've got an aluminum boat. The boat would just rock with the waves. The water would slap against the side of the hull, the wind would whistle outside, and you knew that there were things below the surface much bigger than you that could literally swallow you whole if you went overboard. Yeah, I probably watched too many Jaws movies as a kid growing up. But lying there in the darkness, my mind would begin asking questions. What if the anchor comes loose tonight? What if the weather gets worse? We were already in a storm. What if we drift into those cliffs while we're sleeping? What if no one comes tomorrow? What if we're here for another week? What if we run out of food and water? What if there's a medical emergency? Every man listening knows what I'm talking about. Maybe you've never been stranded in Alaska, but you've laid awake in bed, at 2 o'clock in the morning, asking your own questions. What if the diagnosis comes back? What if my marriage doesn't improve? What if I lose my job? What if my child keeps drifting into an unhealthy direction? Fear feeds off of uncertainty. Fear loves asking questions it can never answer. And one of the things that we worried about the most, or at least I did, was the anchor. The only reason our anchor was holding at all is because it had caught in an avalanche chute that slid down the mountainside into the ocean. We were anchored in roughly about 200 feet of water, but much of the water surrounding us was considerably deeper than that. There were times I'd see it hit 600 feet. And lying there at night, I would wonder, is this anchor going to hold? What happens if it doesn't? What happens if we wake up drifting? What happens if we hit the cliffs in the middle of the night? How would we react? How would we survive? The funny thing is, one of the biggest battles wasn't happening outside of the boat, it was happening inside my head. It was in my thoughts. That's the danger of future thinking. Your mind starts running down roads that don't even exist yet. What if I lose my job? If I lose my job, how will I make my truck payment? If I can't make my truck payment, how am I going to get to work? If I can't get to work, how am I going to provide for my family? If I can't provide for my family, what kind of a man does that make me? And before long, you have built an entire disaster that hasn't even happened. Fear loves to work that way. It takes one uncertainty and it turns it into 10 imaginary catastrophes. The enemy loves to get us focused on a future that we cannot control instead of the present moment that God has called us to live in. Here's what I've learned. When fear isolates us, wisdom connects us. A lot of men go silent when they're struggling. They stop talking, they stop reaching out, they stop asking for help because deep down, they're afraid someone will discover that they don't have it all together. But the truth is, none of us do. That's why brotherhood matters. That's why every man needs a band of brothers. Not the men who are going to carry you out when this life is over, the men who are going to carry you through right now. Men who can lift up our arms when we're tired. Men who can speak the truth to us when fear is feeding us full of lies. It's men who have weathered storms before, and they can remind us that we're going to make it through this one too, and that they're not going to leave us. Ecclesiastes 4 says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I love that verse because it reminds us that strength isn't found in isolation. Strength is found in connection. Sometimes God provides the strength we need directly through His presence, and sometimes He provides it through the men that He places around us. There are moments in life when we need somebody to help tow us back to shore, somebody who's been there before, somebody who can help us see clearly when we're tired, when we're discouraged, when we are worn out from the fight. Guys, that isn't weakness, that's wisdom. But one of the things that helped me during those days wasn't a rescue plan. It was the men I was with. These guys weren't tourists. They were Alaskans. They were hunters. They were fishermen. They were guides. Men who had weathered storms before. One of my favorite memories really wasn't the rescue. It was sitting around in a small kitchen table below the deck of that bayliner. The four of us would gather around that little table while the weather was literally raging outside, and story after story would come out. And it wasn't to impress each other. This wasn't a one-up competition. It wasn't to see who had the biggest, baddest, deadliest adventure. We were sharing our own honest experiences, lessons learned, mistakes we made, close calls that we've survived. This is wisdom. This is action plans. This is outcomes. And what I didn't realize at the time, it was that we weren't just passing time, we were building courage. Every story reminded us that hard things can be survived. They can be overcome no matter how difficult the circumstances look. Every story reminded us that we've all faced challenges before. Every story reminded us that we weren't alone. Brotherhood does that. It doesn't remove the storm, it helps you endure it. One of the reasons so many men are struggling today is because they have nobody sitting at their table. Let me read that again. One of the reasons so many men are struggling today is because they have nobody sitting at their table. They have coworkers, they have acquaintances, people they know, but they don't have brothers. Men who know their story, men who know their fears. Men who can remind them who they really are when life gets hard. And then after 6 days, something happened. A larger fishing boat from a place called Miller's Landing out of Seward found us. The following day, they came back with a sea taxi, and it was powerful enough to tow us all the way back to town. You'd think I would have been overwhelmed with excitement. And don't get me wrong, I was incredibly grateful. I was relieved. I was thankful the story was going to have a good ending, especially after a few of the knucklehead decisions we had made in the waiting, like choosing to take a 15-foot Zodiac 12 miles across the open ocean just to try to get close enough to this massive glacier, which almost ate our lunch, if you remember the story, after a massive piece the size of Walmart came cabbing off, literally causing about a 20-foot wave, almost swallowing us whole. But I remember feeling something else too when the rescue boat pulled up beside us. It was almost a sense of disappointment because the adventure was ending. The challenge was over. And I know that sounds strange, but there is something about challenge that wakes a man up because everything becomes sharper. Everything becomes clearer. You pay attention. Your senses are heightened. You stop living on autopilot. And maybe that's one reason so many men are struggling today. We've become incredibly comfortable. We're safe. We're predictable. We're controlled. Makes me want to puke. And while comfort and security feels good for a little while, eventually it starts to shrink us because nothing is required, nothing stretches us, nothing tests us, nothing answers every question's man that he carries deep in his heart, which is, do I have what it takes? Am I enough? In the moment when I'm called upon to come through, can I, will I, do I have what it takes? Can I handle what's in front of me? I think that's one reason that men love adventure. Not because we love suffering, not because we love danger per se, but because challenge reveals things about us that we can't discover any other way. It answers questions. It stiffens a man's spine. It builds courage. Not just for the next adventure, but for leading a family, loving your wife, raising your kids, facing health challenges, I know. Starting a business, following God's call, that purpose that every one of us is so desperately needing to understand and find out. John Eldredge, in his book Wild at Heart, said that every man needs a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue, and I think he's right. Men want to know where they stand in the battle. We want to know if our lives matter. We want to know if we do have what it takes. We want to know that when life gets hard, that we're not going to fold under pressure. And that's one reason I believe so many men are drawn to awe and adventure. Not because we're chasing a fish. Not because we're chasing a mountain, because we're chasing a trophy. We're chasing the feeling of being fully alive. We are chasing moments that remind us that we were created for more than just merely existing. It comes right back to James chapter 1. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. James isn't saying that the trial feels good. He's saying the trial produces something valuable. Strength, perseverance, character, faith, the very things that cannot be developed in comfort. Maybe the trial you're trying to face today isn't one that you would have chosen. Maybe it's a storm that you never asked for. Maybe you feel stranded. Maybe you're wondering, do I have what it takes? Let me say something about that. Don't waste the wilderness. Don't waste the trial. Don't waste the opportunity that God has given you to grow stronger, wiser, more dependent on Him. Because one day you're going to look back and realize what felt like an interruption was actually preparation. What felt like a setback, it's actually training. And what maybe feels like a wilderness, it's actually a classroom. Enjoy the journey because the journey is the destination. Father God, thank you for the challenges that call us higher. Thank you for the adventures, the battles, and even the trials that reveal who we really are and remind us how much we desperately need you. Lord, for the man listening today who feels stuck, who feels stranded, discouraged, maybe overwhelmed, remind him that you have not abandoned him. Surround him with good brothers. Give him courage for the battle that's in front of him. Help him trust you in the uncertainty and find strength in your presence. Father, help us to use every challenge that faces us to deepen our character, to deepen our faith, and to prepare us for what lies ahead. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Well, guys, before we go, I want to tell you about a resource that I believe can help you fight some of the biggest battles that men face today. It's called The Big Five Man Killers: Declawing the Lies of the Enemy. This 8-week study tackles purpose, respect, anger, lust, shame, and the fear that often hides underneath all of them. It's designed for individual study, for men's groups, for churches, and any man who is tired of merely surviving and is ready to start living free. You can order it through Warner Press, Amazon, Christian Book, or most major online retailers. There's also a free facilitator's guide that's available to help you lead a group through the study if you go and order it through warnerpress.org. I spent probably a good solid year putting together that facilitator's guide, so I know how helpful it's going to be. And guys, if today's episode connected with you, there is a good chance you found yourself in those pages and these stories as well. Like Maximus said in Gladiator, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Men, go live your lives to the full. Because when a man knows who he is in Christ, that he's been created in the image of the living God, when he is no longer held captive by the opinions of others or cares whether he lives or dies, that man is now extremely dangerous for good, because he's been unleashed. We'll see you next time.